All right, well, let's go ahead and get started, everybody. I'm sure those that signed up are going to be jumping in here in a few minutes, especially if they're gathering their lunches and settling back into their cubes and whatnot. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is a relatively small group today. If Haley wants later on, once she's through her story, we can turn on the mics. It's totally up to you, Hallie. But we can leave them off for now for during your story. But we're going to go ahead and dive in. Is that cool? All right, good. Until then, go ahead and just use your chat like Mark's been doing, and we'll go from there. So thank you all for joining. Today, this is the second session of this new series that I'm calling Evolve, the Art of Career Transformation. And it's really just about collecting stories from people that have gone through this journey or are on this journey and that have gone through these different career changes, frankly, like we all do. I don't know if anybody, Hallie, ever stays in a career anymore for 30, 40 years in one spot.
Usually no.
Yeah, no. So, and we're just kind of attaching lifelong learning to that. So how they move through and how they embrace lifelong learning. So today you're going to hear from Hallie as she talks about this crying in the bathroom incident in her career path. So I'm excited to hear a little bit more about that. And that's what you're here for. And that's what you're going to hear today. So I'm excited to share this all with you. So let's go ahead and move on. So your host today is myself, but also Hallie. So Hallie, go ahead and if you don't mind, share just a few minutes about yourself right now at your point and where you're at.
Sure. So I am Hallie Crawford. I am a certified career coach, certified through the Coaches Training Institute, which is one of the original and oldest coach training institutions that's out there. It's based in California. And I got my certification it would have been around 2004, actually. So it's been a really long time. So I'm a certified career coach through the Coaches Training Institute. I have an undergraduate degree from Vanderbilt University, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, and a master's degree from the University of Illinois, the campus that is based in Chicago. I lived in Chicago for just over 10 years. And I have been coaching and training for over 17 years now. I know I sound like I'm 12. I'm actually 45, and I have an 11-year-old son. And I absolutely love what I do, and that's why I'm here today to talk about my career transition and finding my dream job and ideal career path, because I feel like what I do as a career coach, I'm meant to do it. It's meant to be for me. And I got kind of lucky, I think, as well, that I actually enjoy very much being an entrepreneur and business owner. And over the past 7 years, I've grown my team to include additional coaches, as well as resume writers. So I'm happy to be here with you guys today. That's a little bit of my background. Oh, and one other thing. So I live in Atlanta, and I've lived here for about 10 years, and grew up in North Palm Beach, Florida, though. And I think part of, my entrepreneurial bent and spirit, I credit that to my dad, because he's always been a very entrepreneurial kind of guy and business consultant. So that's the deal.
That is awesome. And I cannot I'm happy to hear the rest. I cannot wait to hear the rest of it. Happy to have you here today. That's what I was trying to say.
You.
You're welcome. So yeah, and I will be your host today, fumbling through my words as usual. But my name's
sometimes.
What's that?
We all do sometimes. It's all good.
And that's all good. That's great. My name is Rich Boudry. I am the founder of this little business called The Organic Learner. And what we do at The Organic Learner is just really help people embrace lifelong learning in order to push their careers forward. And not even professionally, but personally. We live in this day and age where, you have access to all the knowledge there pretty much is, if you know how to get to it. And you can, if you tap into that the right way, there's really no limits to what you can do. So that's what we do at The Organic Learner. So just a little bit about our agenda today. It's pretty simple. We're going to hear Hallie's story, and then she's going to share some tips with us. And Hallie, I hope you don't mind. My daughter came up with this title for your session today. Your tips, Hallie's helpful hints.
I love it. It's perfect.
So that is her. She's in 5th grade, and she's like, "How about this, Dad?" I was like, "Perfect." So that's what we went with today. All right. So it's pretty simple. And again, if you guys have any questions, you can just throw them in the chat. At the end, we can open it up and you can ask Hallie some questions if that's okay with Hallie. But until then, we're about to break into her story, and I'm going to hand it off to you right now, Hallie, and go ahead and start us off.
Okay, so on this slide is kind of a quote for how I felt in my early 20s, so a long time ago. But I was actually, at the time, I was living in Atlanta, and this was just after I graduated from Vanderbilt, so it was 95, 96. And I was totally lost in terms of my career. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had a lot of different jobs, and we're going to talk about that in just a second here. But I felt like at the time that I was jumping around from job to job, identifying what I didn't want to do instead of clearly identifying what I wanted to do in the long run. It was kind of like I was checking things off the list and saying no, 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 versus honing it down and being able to say, okay, this is what I want to do for the long run, which, as you can imagine, that would have taken a really long time if I kept, going through the process in that way. And it was very depressing to feel like I said, like I was checking things off the list. But also for me, I really didn't know myself very well. I didn't know what my strengths were and what my skill set was and what I brought to the table. I just wasn't as self-aware as, I could have been. And so that's why I was kind of moving around in a variety of different fields, because I wasn't sure kind of where I fit, so to speak. And I really wanted to. I remember at A&E television when I was sitting in my cubicle one day, I thought, you know what? I cannot keep doing this. I'm not going to be unhappy, in a job for the rest of my life and wait until retirement to be satisfied and fulfilled. And I just, knew that was not going to be the path for me. My parents were worried at the time. They were definitely worried about me. I was living in the basement, actually, of my mother's house here in Atlanta. And she said to me, she's like, one day we were in the kitchen, and this is another crying story, actually, Rich. I hadn't shared this one with you.
Okay.
But we were in the kitchen, and she was saying, you know what, Hallie, like, I love you, and I really want to help you figure out what you want to do with your life, but I can't help you. I don't know how to do it. And she handed me a workshop series or a newspaper clipping that had an advertisement for a workshop coming up that was about writing your personal mission statement. And it was actually held or hosted by a career coach that was here in town in Atlanta. And I had no idea, what this was, but it sounded good. So I figured I would try it. And I remember that day talking with her, and she handed that to me, and I got really teary at the time, standing there in the kitchen. My stepfather started to walk in for a second, and he very wisely just kept going when he saw, that I was starting to get emotional and upset. He just kind of walked into the other room. And my mom gave me my start in that sense because she paid for me to attend that workshop. And that was the beginning of my journey to help me figure out in the long run. It was the very kind of first step, if you will, that I wanted to become a career coach, because I remember vividly sitting in, it was a 4-session workshop over the course of 4 weeks. And I remember sitting in there one day closer to the end of it thinking, I want to do what this woman does. This sounds really, really cool. It had that element of psychology and kind of learning about yourself and, learning about other people in a really deep way that had always been appealing to me. And it combined that with education. And I always was kind of drawn to teaching and training. So my parents were both worried. My mom was worried and helped me in that way. And then later on, when I decided to start my coaching business, they were worried at that point again. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more because I'm going to explain to you how to manage around that for yourself.
Awesome. So let me segue for you, because here's this moment where you're just kind of like, oh, what do I do? I graduated. I should be on my path. I had this thing in mind. And it wasn't what you wanted to do. So I guess take us on that journey from the beginning here. And in this next slide, I guess we're going to start there. That had to have been quite a mindset shift for you.
Yeah, it was. And so when on the last, thing on the slide there about, it was the typical story of when you graduate from college and people ask you, what are you going to do? What's your career path? And I had no idea. And that was very embarrassing and hard for me. So fast forward, or actually we're going to go a little bit back from when I was standing in my mom's kitchen. That was a few years after I had graduated from Vanderbilt University with an undergraduate degree. Grew up in Florida, and decided I did want to go to school far away from home, just enough to get, that independence. And I vividly remember standing on the green lawn on graduation day at Vanderbilt thinking, okay, this is really exciting. It's such an achievement. It's been wonderful for me. But, oh my gosh, what am I going to do next? There's all my family here at graduation. And I just thought I did not go to the Career Center once the whole time I was in school. That was probably a mistake because I had no idea what I was going to do.
Was that something your family talked about much growing up? Did you have that kind of mindset going into college? Like, hey, this is just a segue. This is just a doorway to the next thing. What was that like?
They didn't really talk about it a ton. I do remember in high school thinking about or kind of having this sort of desire somewhere, like this kind of dream in the back of my mind that I did want to own a business and be an entrepreneur. But I mean, when you're in high school, what do you know? I was just kind of making that up at the time. So my parents had always talked about going to college, and that was kind of the last, the last thing that we talked about. The rest, they were open to being supportive of whatever I chose.
Okay.
But it did kind of stop at college at that point. So they were all there, like I said, at graduation. And then it was like, okay, I have no idea what I'm going to do next. And it's also tough too when you're sitting there and some of your friends and colleagues, from school, they know what they're going to do. They're either going to go to graduate school or they're clear. And so it was emotional also because you're always naturally comparing yourself to other people.
Right, right.
And there was, even though my parents never said this to me, there was that pressure of, they just shelled out a lot of money for me to go to this school. And so I better do something with it.
A little pressure.
Yeah, worthwhile. So that was kind of the beginning of really starting to have that sense of, okay, what am I going to do? And feeling really, really lost. And in hindsight, wishing that I had taken some more time, either during the course of the classes that I had attended or gone to the Career Center, just taken some more time to get to know myself and be more self-aware so that I understood who I was and what I could bring to the table.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that sounds like probably so many stories. I mean, you probably talked to a lot of millennials and people that are in that same position. Like, okay, I did what I was supposed to do. Now what?
Yeah, exactly. And there's a book actually that says the title of it is Now What? What's
Now
next?
What? So here's your now what right here. We're looking at it, right?
Mm-hmm. So right after I graduated, I actually moved to California for about 6 months with my boyfriend at the time. We drove cross country, really cool. Saw a lot of neat sights.
So 90s, man.
I know, it was awesome. And like his blazer, it was so great. And we lived with his parents. And I actually didn't put this on the slide because it was a very short stint. However, I thought that I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker because I had made a documentary at Vanderbilt, and it was a little bit, again, of the psychology and the storytelling and the educating. The reason, obviously, to create a documentary is to educate people on a specific topic, and I loved doing that. So I thought, I'm going to go be in the film industry. And once I got out to LA, I realized that was incredibly tough to get into, and I was actually on a commercial where my hand was in the commercial, but I also worked on craft services, and that was a very long day. It was pretty painful. And I did get like an internship at the Disney company out in California too. And a few days into it, I was like, okay, I do not like this. And it's just, my heart wasn't in it. It was like, there's elements about it that were appealing to me, but it wasn't completely the right fit. Okay. And I decided that because I didn't have this passion for it, because getting into the film industry is so intense and competitive, obviously, that it wasn't the right thing for me to do. So came back home to Atlanta where my mom lived at the time. And this would be early career when I officially started working, which is on the slide here. I worked at several different organizations. I worked at the Atlanta Bagel Company for one day. I worked at the Gold Sea Coupon Book Organization for, I think it was about like 8 months, give or take. And I also worked at A&E Television in their sales office. That was probably the best job that I had in terms of feeling like I was leveraging my strengths, and it was fun because it's A&E Television. So I jumped around into these completely different jobs, though, in completely different fields, trying to figure out, again, what I wanted to do. And A&E was the last job that I had where that was the story where I was sitting in my cubicle and I, was saying to myself, I can't just be lost for the rest of my life. And I don't want to wait until I retire to actually have fun. And I spoke to my boss at the time. She was actually great because this was around the time when I took the workshop that I was referencing earlier. And I had to interview other people to ask them, what do you see are my greatest strengths? What do I bring to the table? And my boss at the time, Joy, she was and is an amazing person. And she said, Hallie, here's some of your strengths. You're great with communication, interpersonal skills, those kinds of things. But she also said, too, because you were supposed to ask, what gets me into trouble? And she said, I don't know that you know yourself well enough to really understand, what path you need to be on. And that was like a knife through the heart. It was so painful to hear that and kind of embarrassing. But at the same time, that motivated me to figure this out. I was like, that bit of feedback propelled me to get my act together and work through this. So I left A&E. I decided to go back to get my master's degree so I could dive into education further, and moved up to Chicago. So I had lived in Atlanta at the time for several years and moved up to Chicago. Got my master's degree in communications with a focus on education from the University of Illinois. It's UIC actually, because there's a campus in Chicago as well. And I worked in many different jobs while I was in graduate school. I was a teaching assistant. I worked for the Family Business Council there. And I tried to dabble again. This was kind of my education path, if you will. So I was a TA in the communications department. I taught a few of the college courses. And I realized, though, too, that I didn't want to be a full-time professor. I didn't want to go through and get my PhD and that kind of thing. So as I progressed through the course of my graduate degree, and this would be on the next slide, Rich, I worked for the UIC Family Business Council, and I actually, as a graduate assistant, and after I graduated, I worked there for a year just doing events and kind of helping run the organization with the director. And I needed to get something full-time after being a graduate student. I knew that wasn't it. So I was still kind of meandering on my path a little bit. And I was interviewed for a job that was the marketing and communications coordinator for the business school. And I remember vividly that day thinking, okay, I was on the interview with my prospective boss, and I remember vividly thinking, okay, can I take this job? Is this going to be a fit for me? I had to pay my tuition or pay back my loans, so I needed something, not just to pay the bills, but get back into debt. So needed to do something. But I remember vividly thinking, okay, this woman who would be my prospective boss, she's great. She's a go-getter, all of that. But she's kind of like my dad. And I love my dad, but can I really work with him? Like, I think we would butt heads. And I was like, I'm not really sure this is a fit because of that. And then the second thing I thought is, oh my gosh, I have to wear pantyhose for this job. And I hate wearing pantyhose. I grew up in Florida. You don't have to wear pantyhose there. It's hot all the time.
Right.
So I was like, okay, there's something about that that's not a good fit either.
Yeah.
When they offered me the job, what did I say? I said yes. I said yes because it was the only thing that was offered. And I need to take care of myself financially. So fast forward 2 years into that job, and it turned out that I was right in that it was not a fit for me. I had a really hard time with the management style there. And it just wasn't rewarding and fulfilling to me at all.
Okay.
So at about the 2-year mark, give or take, is when I had about a 4-month give or take period, kind of off and on, but a couple weeks in there where I was crying in the bathroom on a relatively regular basis, kind of like every day, every other day.
Sure. What was making? Why were you? What was causing that? I mean, you already you're on your mission.
The stress and realizing that this job wasn't a fit.
Okay.
And that I had chosen yet again the wrong path.
Okay.
And I knew myself a little bit better, but not as well as, I wanted to. And I felt kind of alone there too. I mean, I had lived in Chicago for several years at that point, but it takes a long time to make friends and kind of get established. And so I felt alone in the sense also that I didn't know how I was going to figure it out. So I was completely depressed. And I would just kind of splash water on my face, come back into the office and, get through the day as much as I can or could at the time. But then what also happened after those incidents is I got the flu, I injured my eye, which sounds crazy, but I injured myself. And I had like a minor surgery, and I just kind of saw how the stress and unhappiness was building up and causing these health issues as a result.
How did you sort through, because sounds like there's a lot of emotions and feelings going on at that point. Yep. How did you sort through and decipher which one was just, because I mean, some people may chalk it off as, it's just work stress. How did you sort out and say, well, it's stress. It's also, I'm not happy. It's this other thing. And how did you do that? How did you figure that out? What was what? And that's I guess my question.
So because it had been so long that I was unhappy, I knew that it wasn't just a passing phase. It wasn't, a project that I just worked on. And because my direct supervisor, my boss, it was hard to work for her, and people kind of knew that, a lot of people did. It was the same way for a lot of people. So I also knew that the work environment, it was just too much pressure. And I also, part of it too, is I made a few mistakes during the course of having that job. And it was like I knew enough, or I was good enough at it to kind of get by, but I didn't feel like it was leveraging enough of my strengths. It was leveraging maybe two of them, but not who I was fully as a person and as a professional.
So did you feel like you were being engaged or not engaged then with your whole being?
Not enough. Yeah, not enough. Like engaged like 25% of the time.
Okay.
Yep.
My on track with the slides. I'm getting into your story, so.
Yes. So the next slide would be the next one.
Okay, perfect.
So at the end of that year, so all of the crying in the bathroom happened in the fall, kind of started off in September, October of that year. And at the end of that year, I decided I'm going to quit. And I didn't have anything lined up. And they all thought I was crazy. I didn't have another job lined up. And they all thought I was crazy.
And they all, you mean your family or your friends
family,
or
co-workers, supervisor, everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, everybody thought I was, nuts to just quit with nothing else lined up. However, during the course of that job that I had, that I, quit, I had taken a few coaching classes. This was when I started the Coaches Training Institute, just their core courses. And I thought, let me just try these out a little bit to see how it feels for me. And when I took those coaching classes, I actually took them in Chicago. And when I took those classes, I remember vividly feeling like I had come home. Like these were my people. This was my environment. I was leveraging the strengths that I actually wanted to leverage, and a bunch of them, not just one or two. So I'd taken those classes, and I decided I'm going to give this a go and consider starting a coaching business. And I didn't know about career coaching, anything like that. I was just going to, just start coaching and see what happened. So I quit that job with nothing lined up, but this idea in the back of my mind, of becoming a coach in the long run. And I just did temp work for about 6 months in Chicago, just so I could, again, remain financially stable. But my goal at the time was to try to find something, whether it was a temp job or something else, that would enable me to pay my bills while I was growing my coaching practice on the side. Okay. So I did that, and it was very interesting because the temp agency would, send me out to different places. But finally, they were like, this girl's pretty sharp. She's got a college degree, everything else. And I worked in their office for a really long time. They wanted me to stay put and help them. So one day, I went to lunch with a very close friend of mine who was older but had served on my thesis committee for my thesis at the U of I.
Mm-hmm.
And she had just been offered a position still at the University of Illinois where I had worked before, where she needed like an office manager. And it was just going to be her and one other person. And we were having lunch at this Greek restaurant, downtown close to the school. And she said, do you want to work with me? And we were very close. I adore her, still keep in touch with her, Jane. And I said, sure, this would be perfect. But by the way, I'd really like to have something that is more part-time because I've got this coaching thing on the side that I want to start doing. And she said, that's fine. She loved the idea, was fine with me, working 4 days a week. So I worked for Jane for 2 years, almost to the day, 4 days a week at the Office of Student Environment, basically. It was a new position and a new department that they had created for her to help improve the classroom spaces on campus. Because if any of you know UIC, it was built in the 60s or so, and literally the architecture is like brutalism or something like that. So they needed to kind of spruce things up.
Sure.
So I worked with Jane for 2 years, and I very actively, at that time, I grew my coaching practice. I found pro bono clients at the beginning, and then very early on, I started charging people, but just a very low rate, and got my coaching practice started kind of one person at a time. The first client, though, that I coached was someone that I had known well, a member of the Family Business Council, where I had worked before. And he said, you know what, let's give it a go. I drove to his office every week to coach him. We did in-person coaching. And Andy that was his name, was fantastic because he started referring me to other people.
Okay. And
between that, and I built out my very first website. It was terrible looking, so basic.
Is this 2001? You're building that out, 2001, 2003?
Yep. So between 2001 and 2003 is when I was starting my coaching practice. And I stayed at the university in that job so that I could pay my bills, have health insurance. And also, though, because if I stayed at UIC for 5 years, I believe it was 5 years, I would be vested in my retirement.
Okay.
And so I wanted to reach that mark and then be able to move on. So for me, it took 2 years to grow my coaching practice to full-time, which was the same salary that I was making at the school. Okay. So that was my goal, is once it's close to there and I'm at the 5-year mark, I can go ahead and move on.
So it sounds like you really tapped into that network of people around you. Is that what to build this plan, this master plan? Once you decided you were not happy, it sounds like you took some action.
I did. And my parents, even though they were worried about me, they were still supportive. My mom hired a coach for me to work with so that I could finalize, and work on getting my business started. And honestly, you said master plan there. It was, so I kind of just went by the seat of my pants.
Okay.
Because I didn't have an MBA. I don't. And I didn't know how to start and build out a business. And so I remember standing in my condo in Chicago overlooking the lake and thinking on my first day, when I quit the university and I was starting my coaching business on that first day, I had a computer and I had some files. And I looked out and I said, what am I doing? Like, this is crazy. But I had already started things going, so I at least had some clients, and I just had to, figure out trial by fire how to put those business practices and systems in place to kind of keep things going. And at the time I was living with my then husband, and he, was supportive, obviously, helped paying the bills, that kind of thing too. So it made a huge difference.
So this you did not have the skills to do what you just said. You did not have the skills to do what you wanted to do, but that didn't hold you back. You said you didn't have an MBA, so it didn't hold you back. So I imagine, do you run into folks like that a lot when you're coaching, that like, Hallie, I don't know what to do. I don't even know where to go.
Yeah, totally. And I have
tell folks like that.
One of the things I did was conducted informational interviews. So I learned by doing, to a certain extent. I got help from my dad because he's an entrepreneur, like I said, so he helped guide me a little bit too. And I also conducted informational interviews. So before I started my practice, I, contacted and talked with coaches about, what are the first 3 steps I should take? So leveraging your network like that, enormously helpful. My mom put me in touch with at least one of those coaches, and the rest I found through my coaching school.
Well, this is kind of getting into the next slide. Let me jump ahead a little bit, because you're getting into some of the good stuff here that I think folks that are on right now would love to hear more about. So here we are. We kind of talked about this, but you're full-time coach, and it didn't take you that long to get there, really. When you look at your path, retrospect, it doesn't look that long, but I'm sure it seemed like forever at the time, right?
Yeah, it was about 4 years all told. If you look at coaching classes, getting up the guts to quit the job, and then the 2 years of growing the business, it was about 4 years. But yeah, even if it took longer, because I love what I do so much today, I would go back even if it took a lot longer and do it all over again.
Because you found that passion. You found that, you figured it out.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Right. So leading into this next, this here is kind of what we're talking about a little bit. Can you talk us through your tips? Because we're starting to talk a little bit about, how to do what you did, how you got there. I'm hearing a lot of some of the things that my takeaways I wrote down, finding your strengths. What skills did you have? This whole self-awareness piece seems to be a really big component and almost like a side journey in itself, or like preparing yourself for the bigger journey. And then, so go ahead and talk us through some of these things here.
Sure. So the first one is a funny one, because at the time when I was crying in the bathroom, I thought, I'll just go shopping, because some people say that, shopping therapy, right? Mm-hmm. And that would have helped had it been just sort of a, if I just needed a Band-Aid to cover the issue, right? So like we talked about before, as I progressed, I realized this wasn't just a passing phase. It was, a big deal. So shopping therapy does not work when you're that unhappy and unsatisfied in your career path. And what you need to do instead is, instead of trying to have stopgap measure and kind of plug, the hole in the boat, realize there's a lot of other holes, and you might just need to start all over with a brand new boat. And so for me, that started my journey of, true self-awareness and working with the coach that I worked with to understand what my values were and what type of work environment was best for me and what strengths I wanted to leverage and use. So just, again, like going shopping and buying a couple of new outfits didn't cover it. You need to go deep in order to determine what the right career path is for you, but also in order to be successful in your professional life, because you need to understand what makes you tick in terms of your values and priorities, the right work environment, what your personality type is, but also what your strengths are, and what your past experiences that you want to leverage. So just having this kind of superficial fix is not the way to go. You need to spend the time kind of digging deep and getting to know yourself again to know what that right next step is.
Did you ever think that this is just slowing me down, that part of it? Or, to this pausing for a moment to really dig deep, like you just said, and doing some self-exploration?
No, it didn't feel like it was slowing me down, but what I did feel like is I just wanted someone to tell me what the answer was.
Oh. Did anybody tell you the answer?
No, that's not how it works.
Right.
And so my coach told me that, my friends and family told me that, and even clients will come and say that to me today and be like, can you just tell me what the answer is? And I'm like, no, sorry, it doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. So you have to go through this sometimes painful, self-exploration and go through the journey. It's about the journey, not the end result, right? In order to figure things out. And nobody can just wave a magic wand and give you the answer. It doesn't happen that way.
If only it could be that way. That'd be so nice.
Yeah, it would be nice, but then we wouldn't be as, confident and mature individuals, I think.
Well, I think there's to tie it back to learning. There's something to be said about doing that. I think if people told you how to do things and what to do, you're not really learning, I don't think, as much as you would by going through the journey yourself. And growing,
And growing,
right. Exactly.
Totally. So the second one is dream first and dream big. And this is one of the tips that we always tell our clients at the beginning, that we have them brainstorm different career ideas or think about, what their big dream, career path would be or role, whether it's career direction or job search or anything else. We want them to really think outside the box and dream really big, because what we have found is that if people, when they're doing the dreaming and they're starting to think creatively, if they get practical too soon, they cut themselves off at the knees with that creative brainstorming. Right? And they'll be like, okay, well, this job pays well, so I'll just go take that, or whatever it is. So we want you to take at least like a good, 2 or 3 weeks of really like dreaming really big about, what do I want for my professional life? What's possible for me and what is my ideal? You can always scale it back later based on practicality. And you will have to do that. That's just part of the process. But if you give yourself that kind of expansive amount of time to really like think outside the box and be creative, you're going to get much closer to the ideal than you would have otherwise.
How do you
Practical thinking soon kind of stunts your growth on it.
When you tell people to dream big, and you just mentioned professionally dream big, how much of the personal life bleeds into that? Like, are they seeing, do your clients or your people to talk to, they see things in 2 buckets, professional and personal? Or do you recommend that they kind of merge those both together when they dream big like this?
I suggest they merge them together, at least to a certain extent. Yeah. So I want them to dream big in their personal and professional lives. And I have them merge them together because we want people to have a career path that is a reflection of who they are as a person.
Okay.
And if they can do that, like a reflection of what their values are, their strengths, everything else that we've mentioned, it's going to be a better fit. So it does need to be both.
Perfect.
Okay. And then tip number 3 is don't listen to the naysayers. So here's the deal. It's okay to listen to people who are going to help you be practical and realistic about your goals and what can happen and what can't happen. Because we all have, limitations in some way, shape, or form, right? Mm-hmm. But don't listen to those naysayers who, even if they have good intentions, in some cases they may not, but even if they have good intentions, don't let them beat you down in terms of your dreaming big. So I always tell people, not until you have the dream really solidified and your kind of plan and path, the beginnings of it at least mapped out, don't share it with anybody. Only people that are going to be very supportive. So your partner or spouse, if you know they're going to be supportive, great. But think of yourself as, at the very beginning with your dream, you're a sapling tree. You don't have your roots in the ground as deep as you could. And if they come over, they could just push you right over easily. A naysayer could. So you need to wait a little bit longer until you're more solid and you know what you want to do. You have a little bit more of the plans in place. Then you can start sharing with people, because people mirror back what we feel. And if we're kind of uncertain and hesitant, they're going to mirror that back to us, and it's going to make it worse. So keep it to yourself until it's the right time for you, and only share with positive, supportive people along the way.
Interesting, because that seems to go against everything, not everything, but a lot of folks in my little journey here have said, tell people, get feedback, share it. But there has been a lot of naysayers. So that seems to be really good advice to let it
balance it,
flesh out, and then get to a point then you have some answers, and you can, because it seems like a lot of people will not quiz you, but
no, they'll make you question yourself.
Yeah.
They probably have good intentions, like
right.
My family members were like that. Luckily, my parents, even though they were worried, they kept it to themselves for the most part, and they just tried to help me be realistic and practical. So it doesn't mean that they have bad intentions, but it could come across that way and activate things in you that are just not helpful.
And shoot you down. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Wait, do you mind if before we go into the rest of it, do you mind if we open things up a little bit? I know Mark and Polly are here. They may have a few questions. Do you mind if I open up the share? Polly and Mark, it's the 2 of us, and I would love it if you guys had some questions or wanted to add to this conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and open your mics here.
And Rich, I have a 2:00, so I do need to be done at least 5 minutes before the hour.
Perfect. No worries. Okay. Mark and Polly, just go ahead and unmute your mic if you want something, you want to share something or ask a question. That would be great.
Hey,
Polly, go
I have
ahead.
a question. So, how do you, you've got advanced degrees, Hallie, but how do you prove what you've learned, outside of an official learning? I do a lot of self-study and a little, skill development on my own. But how would you recommend that I, show that to people?
Sure. I think by the way that you interact with them and work on projects with them, don't be afraid, I should say, to kind of flex your muscle a little bit and share your expertise. So it's even in just kind of the day-to-day interaction a little bit in terms of you being confident, you sharing your wisdom and expertise, being willing to give advice, and even coaching people a little bit along the way with, what you have learned. The other way that I do that, obviously, is testimonials and references, from clients that we've worked with. And one of the things that helps me with this today, too, as well, is I've published several books. And that's another way to kind of demonstrate your expertise. Does that answer, at least as a start?
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, no problem.
Great question. Great question. Excellent stuff. Mark, if you got something, I'm going to just leave your mic on, and Polly, feel free to jump back in again, but we're going to go ahead and jump to the next slide. So feel free to answer any or ask any question you have.
Yeah, totally.
So Hallie, that was great. Some great tips and some great suggestions. There's so much in that story, but what now your current organization, where you're at now, what are some of the things that you guys do to help out folks that might be in the middle of their career transition or transformation, or just maybe they were like you were right out of college and kind of stumble around their early 20s, late 20s, 30s, maybe then their 40s, 50s, kind of this reemergence of, hey, I can do whatever I want to do. What would you advise them to do? Yeah.
So our services are career direction, job search, and then strategic career planning and work performance. So we help people identify their ideal career path. We use an 8-piece ideal career model that helps them kind of check the boxes of, okay, this is who I am as a person and as a professional, and this is how I can brainstorm different career ideas based on the model. So the model is something that I developed over doing this. And I developed it about 3 or 4 years into getting into coaching. So Polly, that's another thought for you, case studies. But also for me, I realized I've got all this stuff in here, all of this knowledge. I need to winnow it down and put it into something that people can digest pretty easily. So I developed this ideal career model and, with the different pieces on it, and had just a graphic designer come up with, the formatting for me to lay it out. And then wrote our Identify Your Ideal Career workbook, which helps people identify what those different pieces of the model mean for them as a person. So that's the career direction piece. The job search and career transition, when we work with clients and they've figured out what they want to be doing, we then help them conduct their job search, branding themselves, networking, conducting informational interviews, interview skills, all of that. And we talk with them as well, not just about the nuts and bolts of the job search, but their career transition as a whole. How long is this going to take? And what do you need to do in order to make it effective for you along the way? So we help them with that transition planning as well to get into that new job. And then finally, once they've completed and made that transition, we have templates and worksheets as well for their strategic career planning. So where do I want to be in 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, 10 years? And we use, again, the model at that point to help them identify what the different steps are, action items are that they need to take in order to move towards their long-term goal. So that strategic career planning. And along the way, we help them or coach them on their work performance as well, if they need that. Okay, where do I need to be better with my time management, or being a better leader, leadership skills, those kinds of things. So these are the 3 areas that we focus on with our coaching.
This is perfect. This is some great stuff here. And I highly recommend you guys check out Hallie.com, HallieCrawford.com to learn more about what they do and what services they provide. And the video, this is a little video image up in the top corner here. I highly recommend you seek that out, because it's a great video with some great information to get you kind of started on this journey. Hallie, Mark did have a question. He doesn't have a mic, so he typed in this question. He said, you mentioned that you started pro bono. He said, did you see a lot of new people from the University of Illinois? So that's great question.
I did. So at the very beginning, that was sort of my natural network, because I'd been there for several years. So those were the clients that I had first. And then it was also through, honestly, friends that I had made in Chicago too. And I got a couple of clients just through friends and family members as well. But it is, you look in your own backyard first. And it was natural, obviously, to start with the U of I. Yeah, those were my first original connections and clients.
And so here are some of your clients right here. And I see Nashville, Chicago. There's some familiar places that you mentioned in your story. So everybody, we have just a minute or two left. I wanted to make sure I kind of button things up without rushing off too quickly. But there's a list of testimonials here. And on Hallie's site, there's another list of, there's more testimonials and some other great resources that you can dive in and read a little more about. But I just wanted to get through the rest of this, because Hallie did offer a little prize or giveaway at the end of this. And I won't, this is what the Organic Learner does, but you can read this and talk about it later. Yeah. So here is what Hallie would like to give away. So Hallie, go ahead and talk a little bit about this book that you have, your ebook.
This ebook is the 5 first steps that we work with our clients on to help them figure out their career direction. So it's specifically for identifying your ideal career. So if you are uncertain about your career path and you feel like some of it is a fit, but not all of it, and you're not sure if you should stay or go, or if you're just completely lost and feeling like I need to, kind of like I was, figuring out what I need to do long term, or if you're evaluating a few different career options, this book is really, really helpful. It actually outlines and gives you the first 5 exercises that we do with all of our clients at the beginning of that process. So it outlines that for you guys.
So Hallie, I will get a link from you and I can share that link in an email. Is that all right?
Yes, that'd be great.
And then we have the same, we have a little different offering, but we're just going to offer everybody a chance to go ahead and take our Connected Employee course. But that's all we got today, guys. If there's any questions, please reach out to Hallie on social media. Check out their website. She's got some other great tips, and her social media footprint out there is full of some great learning. So I highly recommend you tap into that and get connected to her network, add her into your learning network. And I really think it's going to help you out on your career. That is it. So thank you so much, Hallie, for joining us. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Polly, for jumping on. And thanks to the rest of you that are going to listen in later on. So that is it. So Hallie's got another call to jump on, and we'll let you all go. Have your day.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Hope it was helpful. Have a great one.
It was. Thanks.
See you, Mark. See you, Polly.
Bye-bye.
Okay, recording is done.
Cool.